Okay, hello, ladies and gentlemen. This is Dr. Annette Feravich with Healthy Mind, Body, Spirit, and you can find me on the internet at www.healthymindbodyspirit.net. And we're a little bit late, but I'm going to get to it. What are we talking about today? Well, today we're talking about supplements, and we want to talk about supplements as they relate to medicine. So we're kind of giving a comparison here of medicine and supplements and what do they do to the body. And so I've been preparing this for you, and I think I'm ready to go. All right, so let's take a look at our. All right, so remember that this is part of our series. Let's do it this way. And we're talking about a happy now year, a happy wow year. Why? Because we want to get started with making some changes. And in particular, because we have so much going on with our health, and because our health has become so politicized, what we really want to do is we want to learn to take control of our health by ourselves. We want to have our own knowledge and then make our own decisions regarding our health. Right now, what we know is we have one single way to look at things, and that single way to look at things has typically been a way that looks at and has traditional medicine dominate what we have going on as far as knowledge, as far as diagnoses, as far as treatment goes. So we typically have one single way of looking at medicine. And that's what we want to challenge today. We want to take a look at, does this what traditional way that we look at medicine, does this benefit us? Or are there some other ways that we might want to try and take a look at medicine in addition to our traditional ways? And then this way we have every opportunity to make our own decisions relative to our health. Now, we do want to acknowledge that medicine has really come a long way and done some wonderful things for us. But we also want to acknowledge that it is a really big industry that makes a lot of money. And we want to make sure that our monies are going in a place that's really benefiting us. So that's what we're going to try and take a look at today. So we are looking at supplements versus medicine and our immune system. All right? So let's take a look at today's agenda. Okay, so for today, what are we going to take a look at? We're going to take a look at early theories in sort of that laid the groundwork for what we consider to be Western medicine today. All right, then we also want to take a look at how does medicine work in the brain and in the body. And in particular, really what we are doing is we are, for a lot of the pharmaceuticals, we are really changing the chemistry in our brain. Okay, and so we'll take a look at definitions for medicine. How is medicine doing? So let's kind of take a look at the report card for medicine so far. What are what we call CAMs? So we're going to talk about this. These are contemporary alternative medicines is what they are called. So these are kinds of holistic approaches that we have to medicine. So let's take a look at those alternative medicines. How do they work today? And so basically, what is the principle by which they are working? And then finally, let's take a look at their track record or their report card as well. Okay. So starting with trying to have a better understanding of what is medicine, let's take a look at who is Hippocrates. And Hippocrates is known as the father of medicine. And he was a Greek physician, and you can see there that he lives around the time of 460 to 370 BC, if you prefer, or BCE, before Common Era is the BCE. So what is so important about Hippocrates, and how was it that he is the father of medicine? Well, he was the first person to believe that diseases were caused naturally, not because of what most individuals at the time thought, which is basically superstition. And not only that, but also as a statement on the type of life that we were living. And so, if we were living a poor life, what individuals believed at prior to this era is that it was due to a life that was not virtuous, and that our sins were, that our health was a consequence of our sins. Okay, so but what Hippocrates brought to the equation, and this is really what is important and a very big highlight of what today's presentation is, and that is that Hippocrates used prognosis and clinical observations that were systematic in order to categorize diseases. Let's take a look at this. So, the use of prognosis and clinical observations, which was a systematic organization or categorization of diseases, in order to find a mechanistic relationship between what was going on in the body and health and disease, right? And so what they were looking for is some clear line of association between fluids in our body, which Hippocrates also called the humoral theory. All right, so that has to do with fluids in our body. So disease was related to pathogens that could be found in the fluids in our bodies. And so you can see why this is important, right? Even with the virus, what do we find? That is a pathogen. Where do we find that? Well, because it's airborne, we find it in our nasal passages, right? So when we are being tested, they test our nasal passages. And so taking a look at mucus, for example, to see whether or not that actually contained the disease. And so again, what we were finding is that there was actual physical evidence for a disease, and that there was not this kind of hocus pocus. And remember that this is what they were talking about in 400 BCE. So long before, for example, AD, or after Common Era, if you would like, okay? And so that was actually, in Christian terms, right? Year one was Jesus' coming. So prior to that, 400 years prior to that, we were thinking about disease as being kind of hocus pocus. And this is kind of the interesting thing that I think today is, and that is that I think that there is a lot of return to medicine kind of being this hocus pocus, that instead of finding out what is the mechanism by which this disease occurs and that we experience this disease, what we are doing is simply treating symptoms as if the disease is hocus pocus. And so that's what we need to really look at and scrutinize as far as traditional medicine goes. Is traditional medicine following the kinds of traditional theories and ethics that medicine was founded on? Or are we going back to a sort of hocus pocus that's under the guise of science? And so that's what I think is important for us to think about and take a look at when we are looking at medicine or any kind of treatment or pathogen. We want to know the mechanism by which, right? So, for example, with the virus, we know that it's airborne. We know that it very often gets in our nasal passages. We do find out that it is not so much found on surfaces. However, I also heard that viruses can stay on money for 2 weeks. So there's probably a lot of studies and research that we probably still need to do, and not just do. We likely have some of this information that's available out there. However, we are not getting this information to the public, and the reason why is because we are fearing that the public is going to get misinformation or believe misinformation, and this simply does not contribute to a scientific knowledge base that we really need, all of us need, to understand our health a little bit better. And so the thing about medicine is your medicine actually based on sound science and observation that was the foundation of Western medicine? Or is your doctors kind of telling you some hocus pocus? Because a lot of times doctors don't even know the mechanism by which something works. And you will even hear commercials on TV that start explaining some symptoms and side effects that they don't fully understand. And so what they're suggesting is let's use some medicine to treat this, even though we don't fully understand the mechanism by which this has occurred. All right, so those are some questions that we want to kind of take a look at. And so what were we talking about? We were taking a look at, first of all, some of the early theories that lay the groundwork for Western medicine today. All right, so, and now what we want to do is we want to take a look at how does medicine work on the brain. Okay, so when we first take a look at this, let's take a look at what is the definition of contemporary medicine, first of all. So contemporary medicine applies to things like biomedical sciences, all right? So we're looking at the biology behind our medical science. Biomedical research, they look at genetics and medical technology in order to diagnose, treat, and prevent injury and disease, typically through pharmaceuticals or surgery. So that is the typical medicinal approach, that they look at pharmaceuticals or they alter things through surgery. Okay, they can also offer some other things like psychotherapy. They also talked about, or other kinds of medical devices that can offer for healing. But remember, when we start talking about that, the medical community, for example, does not support the evidence that is behind things like chiropractic care. So when we are looking at the sort of the broad range of what traditional medicine is today, or contemporary medicine is today, it really does exclude things like chiropractic care. And chiropractic care is taking a look at the mechanisms by which we have some dysfunction in our body. For example, if we have compressed vertebrae in our lower backs, that is going to create dysfunction in our intestinal areas, our large and small intestines. So we may have gastrointestinal problems due to the mechanics of our vertebrae, as well as getting the messages to and from the rest of the areas of our body. So chiropractic care has a very clear mechanistic logic and support and rationale behind it, but contemporary medicine does not take a look at or accept things that chiropractic care, which can also be defined as things like medical devices and for example, the regular vaccines, what do? They actually work on our bodies, right? So what they do is they introduce a disease into our bodies, and by introducing just a small portion of that disease in our bodies, what ends up happening is that kicks up our immune system. All right, and so when we kick up our immune system, what are we doing? Let's take a look at that on this slide here. So when we are getting a vaccine or when a disease is introduced to our bodies, in either case, what ends up happening is that we have an increase in our immune system. And what does that mean? Well, first of all, where we get our cells from is we get them from our bone marrow. And so these cells are produced in our bone marrow. And what do we get? We get all kinds of cells that are associated with our immune system. All right, so these are cells, again, they're associated with our immune system that come from our bone marrow. There are other cells that come from other areas of our body, but for our blood and our immune system, they come from our bone marrow. And you can see here then on the left side, what we have is we have blood cells that are associated with the functioning of actually our blood. So we have red blood cells there, and we can see there that erythrocytes is their scientific name. We have other blood cells that are associated also with things like with other immunities that are in our blood system, including things like platelets, for example. But what we have also created are other cells that are considered part of our immune system, or we call those our white blood cells. So these are those cells that help fight disease. So we call those lymphoid cells. And so you can see here what we have is we have cells that are called natural killer cells. And some of these natural killer cells include things like macrophages, for example. And so they just go out and they start killing any kind of foreign invaders in our systems. And then we have T cells and we have B cells. And what T cells and B cells do is they talk amongst one another, indicating that there is a unique foreign disease out there, and these are the antigens by which that disease can be eradicated in our bodies. So those white blood cells consist of natural killer cells, T cells, and B cells, or these are our lymphocytes, for example, or lymphoids, for example. And again, these help with our immune system, all coming from our bone marrow. Some of this immunity is natural immunity, which means that no matter what the disease is, this is what is being produced in our bodies. But other things, other immunity comes from our immune system learning, right? Learning what kills the foreign invaders. And then what ends up happening is that when we no longer need those cells in our system, they create a memory for the foreign invaders. So we don't necessarily have the antigens in our body at high levels any longer, for example, after we get the COVID virus. We don't need to have them in our bodies any longer. What we need to do is have the memories for making the antigen, and so that when the foreign invader comes into our bodies, we can make these specialized T cells and B cells that are specialized for that specific virus that we have. Okay, all right, let's see here.
I don't like.
Okay, there we go. Again, our bodies begin to produce these specialized cells when the body is introduced to a foreign invader. We do that through a vaccine. So that's one of the ways that our body responds, right? So, and we can also, through medicine, create this artificial response that then creates memory in our white blood cells so that when we see the foreign invader come again, right, the memory kicks in from our T cells and they create then the antigen in our body that fights the foreign invader very readily. So that's a great way that medicine has helped us produce an antigen automatically, or memory for an antigen in our bodies, okay? But when that foreign invader mutates, the vaccine needs to change because there is memory in the T cells for one version, but not another version, which is one of the reasons why these boosters are necessary, although the vaccine also has to change as well, which it has not done for these new versions, like the Delta version and the Omicron version. Okay, all right, so that just kind of gives you just a little bit of a background on that. We also know that chemistry changes in our that doesn't. We also know that medicine also is made to change the chemistry in our brains as well, right? And so when we take a look at some things like antidepressants, we take a look at changing chemistry in our brains. Now, this is the reason why it's very important to have an understanding that our second brain is in our guts, and not necessarily then should we be necessarily changing the chemistry in a problem in our gut. Okay, so what do I mean by that? Well, let's take an example of serotonin. So serotonin is a neurotransmitter that's part of the reward center of our brain. And neurotransmitters are chemicals that are released in our brain when we have an imbalance in our bodies. Okay, so we can see here that we have several different kinds of neurotransmitters. And they list their major functions. So here what we see is so as I started to talk about, first of all, serotonin is a neurotransmitter, and serotonin has been associated with things like depression. So how do these chemicals that are created, or pharmaceuticals that are created, change the function in our brain? Well, let's take a look at the slide that I have here first of all. So what we see here is that when we have an imbalance in our bodies, what ends up happening is that we have these vesicles that contain neurotransmitters, and they then are released in this synapse here, and by releasing them, then what we do is we make certain necessary connections in our brain in order to, for example, respond to the changes in our bodies or in our brains. And so, for example, when there is a dysregulation in our body that's related to sleep dysregulation or mood dysregulation, we end up then creating an imbalance in our body, and what we look to is the release of serotonin to be able to make these corrections in this imbalance in our bodies. But what we find is that although pharmaceuticals and antidepressants change the level of serotonin in our brain, what we know is that the majority of serotonin, a neurotransmitter, is actually made in our gut. only 10% of serotonin is made in our brain, while 90% of serotonin is made in your gut. So why is it important to understand what pharmaceuticals are doing and to understand your body a little bit better? Well, what we see is that what pharmaceuticals do is, in order to keep the neurotransmitter, serotonin, for example, in the synapse, what it does is it blocks what they call the reuptake of that. And so what ends up happening is, instead of serotonin being contained, there was a reuptake uh, into this vesicles, or it disappears in this synapse. What they do is they block these receptacles from dissipating the serotonin. So this is an unnatural process, keeping serotonin for longer periods of time in the synapse, which is not how it occurs in the brain and in the body. What you want to do is regulate the serotonin, most likely through your gut, for example. And then by regulating the serotonin in your gut, we can naturally keep levels of serotonin in the rest of our body. And when we keep those natural levels of serotonin in the rest of our body, that regulates things like mood and sleep. That's what serotonin is related to. Serotonin is only indirectly related to depression as it relates to our ability to regulate things in our bodies. All right, so regulating things like our sleep, that's related to mood, or even our ability to regulate our emotions. We can see that that is related to chemistry in our gut. So when we see that medicine is approaching problems, but they are only approaching them indirectly, this is why it's important for us to understand the mechanisms by which these pharmaceuticals are working on the body. If they are not working directly to change chemistry that's in our gut and only chemistry that's in our brain, then when we think about the mechanics of that, probably aren't very good mechanics to change our depression, for example. Okay, all right, so now we have a better idea of how our immune system is connected to our brain and changes in our brain. Another change in our brain, or another neurotransmitter that I want to talk about, is our neurotransmitter dopamine. Now, dopamine is related to goal orientation. So dopamine is related to getting excited and anticipation of our goals, no matter what that goal is. So I might have a goal to graduate college, and the excitement of that as I get closer produces dopamine in my brain. I might have a goal of having a date with somebody I'm highly attracted to. That creates dopamine. Those butterflies in our stomach, what that is dopamine. And again, we see that dopamine is also related to our gut as well. So we can create dopamine in different things that we eat as well. Okay, so let's keep moving on here. And take a look at another related neurotransmitter that we have listed there, and that is acetylcholine. And acetylcholine is involved in things like arousal, attention, memory, and also muscle contractions. So when we are taking some antidepressants, what some of those antidepressants we see is that they have side effects. Okay, let me go and take a look at this list of side effects that we see that are associated with these antidepressants. And then we're going to talk just a little bit about that relationship that we were just looking at between acetylcholine and dopamine. And that's what I'm trying to get at here. So again, we're focusing a little bit more closely on things like the mechanics that are behind some of these side effects that we see in these pharmaceuticals that individuals are using. Okay, so what do we see here? We see that some of the consequences is that first of all, most of the information that we get on how effective any of these pharmaceutical drugs that we have, they are coming, first of all, from the drug companies. So that's one of the reasons why we have to take a look at and be a little bit more skeptical about the information behind some of the pharmaceuticals that we're taking. We also know that consequences of antidepressants are that we have higher rates of suicide, that individuals who take antidepressant have a shortened lifespan on average of about 20 years. We also know that antidepressants also act, for example, as a sleep sedative on the entire system, and this is what sometimes can compromise our systems. We know that antidepressants also causes shrinkage in the brain. We know that individuals who are on antidepressants are incarcerated more often, that they are in mental hospitals more often, and they also more often are likely to use cocaine because they work similarly on the brain and can cause certain addictions as well. We also know that these individuals have higher rates of obesity as well. And those are some of the side effects that we see with antidepressants. So some of the side effects that we see include things like across the board, we see things like headaches, diarrhea, nausea. We see things like insomnia, dizziness, agitation. We also see things like across the board with antidepressants, problems with sexual dysfunction, a loss of sexual appetite, nervousness, fatigue, restlessness, and irregular menstrual cycles as well. All right, so many different side effects that are associated with these antidepressants. One of the reasons why we see that these side effects are predictable is because they are working on the neurotransmitter acetylcholine. And what they are doing is they are creating a dysfunction in this neurotransmitter. So acetylcholine was the first neurotransmitter that was discovered. And what we know is that it helps stimulate, but also block the effects of certain other neurotransmitters. And what this does is acetylcholine changes the way that the neurotransmitter is broken up in the synapse. So what it is doing is it is changing the effect of the dissipation of neurotransmitters in the synapse. So why do we want things like antidepressants to change acetylcholine, or we see dysregulation in acetylcholine? Why is it important as far as a pharmaceutical is concerned? Because what it does is it changes the ability for protein to break down the neurotransmitter in the synapse. Well, what are we seeing as a result of this kind of dysfunction of acetylcholine? Well, first of all, we're seeing a dysregulation in dopamine. And this dysregulation of dopamine is critical in the brain because what that is associated with is goal orientation. When individuals are feeling unmotivated, they are unable to get their motivation back if dopamine is dysregulated because there is no association between what they are doing and the reward that they are getting. And so this dysregulation is critical. And how do we also know that this dysregulation is occurring because of this acetylcholine? and as far as dopamine, but we know that it regulates dopamine, which again is writing down my motivation to get goals. However, what we are also seeing as a side effect of this is, and I have to get this name right, and that is this tardive dyskinesia. Tardive dyskinesia. And what is this tardive dyskinesia? Well, what this is it is these dysregulated, impulsive kinds of twitches that you can see now that they have new medications for and new pharmaceuticals. What this is it is a side effect of antidepressants that are changing the regulation of your dopamine. And what they are causing is they are causing these neurological impulsive twitches in hands and arms and behaviors and even lips. So in facial expressions, so twitches in faces, or even sounds like what, right? So different sounds or tics that individuals might get. These are side effects of antidepressants that have to do with the dysregulation of your dopamine, which again has a consequence of changing your motivation. So these kinds of things that when they are talking about changes in your brain and understanding then these side effects, what science and pharmaceuticals have been ignoring because they do not fully understand your brain is they are ignoring these kinds of mechanistic reasons or the mechanics behind why these things are occurring, why these side effects are occurring. They make sense. If I dysregulate my dopamine, acetylcholine has to do with bodily functions and bodily changes. All right, well, if it has to do with bodily movements, well, if you are changing then and dysregulating my dopamine, which is dysregulating my acetylcholine, then what you are going to expect is some kind of dysregulation in my bodily functions. You would expect to see these twitches. These are the mechanics behind the pharmaceuticals. So, are they selling you pharmaceuticals where they're like, I don't know, watch that commercial for that tardive dyskinesia. Watch that commercial. They'll tell you they don't fully understand. Well, you should fully understand because it's not voodoo. It's not voodoo, it's science. And we are supposed to observe these things and record these things all the way back from the father of medicine, Hippocrates, who told us to do this. So when we hear pharmaceutical companies trying to sell you pharmaceuticals, but going, man, I don't know all these side effects, it's because they don't understand their very own oath, which is to understand these observable foundations behind these diseases. Okay, I have got to plug in because I am almost out of all right, I am back. Okay, so again, what we want to do is we want to make sure all the way through, no matter what your medicine is that you have a good understanding of what is going on with your vaccine, with your prescription medication, with your body. What are the mechanics behind what's going on in your body? And if your doctor doesn't know, then your doctor needs some more information. Your doctor should know. That is the foundation of good medicine, and that's the foundation of good science. Okay, so let's go on and move on to take a look at a few of these other, did I get all the consequences and all those side effects? Yeah, one of the things I also wanted to talk to you a little bit as well, as far as some of these health consequences that we are seeing today, is some statistics that are related to nutrition. So let's take a little bit of a look at, first of all, some of these overall consequences then that we see to health in the United States. So we want to see and take a look at how is our report card on health. If this is the method or the path that we decided to take, how are we doing? Well, what we're finding is first of all, we are dying younger. And these are statistics that all were before COVID. So now we know that the statistics are even worse. We know that over the past 20 years, the United States has not changed or has not increased their life expectancy like other countries have. So we have still remained at approximately 78 years, and now that is falling. And in particular, we are seeing younger people die at earlier ages. So this is going to be very interesting to see what's going to happen after COVID with these statistics as well. We see here that 54% of United States children live with at least one chronic health condition, such as diabetes, obesity, or asthma. We can see that about 74% of adults are overweight or have obesity. Adults ages 40 to 59 have the highest rate of obesity of any age group, with adults 60 years and older having 41% rate of obesity. This is incredible, just to add to some of these other statistics. About 40% of children and adolescents are overweight or have obesity. The rate of obesity increases throughout childhood and teen years. And the thing is that we have implemented many other health strategies and treatment for many things, and yet we continue to see, including things like programs for food and what are some better ways or better eating habits, and what are some better nutritional habits for us. There's a new dietary guideline for Americans that just came out in 2020 that takes us through 2025, and this is where I'm getting these statistics from. So regarding cardiovascular disease, heart disease is a leading cause of death. About 18.2 million adults have coronary artery disease, and is the most common type of heart disease. I'm going to read some of these other statistics to you as well. Okay, stroke is the fifth leading cause of death. Hypertension, high LDL lipoids, that's the lipoid density. Cholesterol and high total cholesterol are major factors in disease and stroke. We have been eating better. We've cut back on our smoking, and smoking was a huge contributor to heart disease, yet we are not seeing these statistics as they relate in particular to obesity as well, moving or going down. About 45% of adults have hypertension. More black adults than white adults have hypertension, 54% compared to 46%. We know that as far as African Americans are concerned, they suffer every single disease to a greater degree than their counter whites do. Nearly 4% of adolescents have hypertension. More than 11% of adults have high total cholesterol. More women than men have high total cholesterol. So this is changing. Used to be women were healthier. And 7% of children and adolescents have high total cholesterol. As far as diabetes, almost 11% of Americans have type 1 or type 2 diabetes. Almost 35% of American adults have pre-diabetes. Almost 90% of adults with diabetes are overweight or have obesity. About 210,000 children and adolescents have diabetes. About 6 to 9% of pregnant women develop gestational diabetes. Colorectal cancer in men and breast cancer in women are among the most common types of cancer. Let's see here. The incidence of mortality rates are highest among those ages 65 and older for every cancer type. This is interesting as well because we see that these individuals are low in vitamin D. And so here we begin to see that maybe our traditional approach to medicine doesn't, first of all, follow our our traditional promise of what we were supposed to be doing in medicine, first of all, right? And also, it is not really getting us the results that we were hoping for. Let's see, bone health and muscle strength. More women, 17% than men, have osteoporosis. 20% of older adults have reduced muscle strength. Now, this has to do with calcium, right? So bone strength has to do with calcium. And so why are we taking a look at different alternatives to some of these problems when we know that they are associated with things like, for example, for vitamins, associated with vitamins and minerals. We also know that calcium is not processed without, hold on, there we go. Calcium is not processed without sufficient levels of vitamin D. And so here's where we are beginning to see that modern medicine, contemporary medicine, actually does not address some of the mechanics of the body in the same way that vitamins and minerals can address the mechanics of the body. We see changes in immunity, for example, with increasing in our T cells and our B cells, which have our memory for foreign invaders, right? And so, so we see that talking to our immune system in appropriate ways can help change our physical our physical health. And so we know the mechanics behind it. And that's what we want to take a look at. All right, so let's just take a look at a few more of these stats that we have here. Okay, we see 1 in 5 North Americans have asthma. 60 million people have asthma or allergies. We also know that asthma is associated with perception of events. We know that individuals experience more asthma conditions or symptoms when they are around their mothers, for example. And so this is suggesting that if they are able to be comforted in some ways, that maybe that is associated with that kind of environmental condition. We see that neurological disorders are the third leading cause of death in 2014. 2017, suicide was the second leading cause of death. We see that suicide has risen in rates between 40 and 60%, depending on the population that you are in, since this COVID virus. So it's just extraordinary. We see that autism here in 1970 was 1 in 10,000, in 1985 1 in 2,500, and what we know is that autism rates today are 1 in under 50 individuals have autism. Here we can see prevalence of autism rates since 2018. And so all of these are available through research and there are links that are available that you can see there. The research is available. We can see that cancer is a #1 cause of childhood death in the United States. We know that even for COVID virus, individuals who are under 70 years old are only 0.05% likely to die from COVID. We can see now 1 in 2.5 people will be impacted by cancer. 1 in every 2.5 people. 9 years of age, it was 1 in 10 people. So this is really, really quite sad as far as the statistics go. So how is our health report card? Well, so far our health report card doesn't really look very good. We see here that cancer for both young and adult children is consistently within the top 3 to 5 causes of death for children. So how is our health report card? How is our traditional medicine doing? So the incidence of colorectal cancer is expected to shoot up by 90% in 20 to 34-year-olds over the next decade. And there's a link there as far as colorectal cancer is concerned. We see again, diabetes is the 7th leading cause of death for 15 to 44-year-olds, and the 6th leading cause of death for those between their mid 40s and 50s. So our report card really isn't looking very good for our traditional medicine. We can see here that we've got severe cognitive decline, that a person is diagnosed in North America with Alzheimer's disease every 67 seconds. And part of this we know has to do with our decline in our mineral content that we have in food. So there are some important minerals that you can see the content in our foods from 1914 changed significantly to 1963, and then we can see to 1992, and we can see that significant reductions in things like iron has decreased by 96% from foods from 1914 to 1992. And so why is it maybe that we should have traditional medicine taking a look at vitamins and minerals instead of looking at pharmaceuticals? Because these are the things that work with our bodies. We can see even when we take a look at organic products, we need to have better regulation, because even those products, these are protein powders that were certified as organic, still had over 2 times the heavy metals like lead, arsenic, and cadmium in their protein powders. So how can they call them organic? Because according to the USDA, we only need one product that is considered organic in order to be able to label our products as organic. So you need to be looking at even vitamins and minerals that are being regulated according to very poor regulation standards. Why? Why? Because we've learned how to regulate things according to the needs of pharmaceutical companies. So we're regulating our foods and we're regulating our health needs according to what the pharmaceuticals are able to produce chemically for our bodies, whether or not that makes any sense mechanically for our bodies, right? Okay, let's see. I cannot stand that glare changes all the time. Doesn't look very good. Okay, and here we can see here, health costs have skyrocketed over the years. And now what we also see is that pharmaceuticals are in the hands of private citizens and private businesses who are able to buy patents for certain drugs, pharmaceuticals, that the drug companies have gotten individuals to become dependent on, and now buy the patents for and are able to set the prices wherever they choose. How is that any kind of freedom as far as our health care is concerned? How is that keeping the Hippocratic Oath never to do harm in our medicine? It seems like we are doing significant harm, not only just in the only single way that we are looking at approaching medicine, but also in the kind of economy that we've set up surrounding our medicine as well. They are profiting not us, nor are they necessarily helping us. Where's the research that we need in these kinds of decreases in vitamins and minerals, and what that does to our health, and how that then regulates or dysregulates future health and future diseases? It's owed to us. That's owed to us. Here we can see changes in the leading causes of death. And what we see here now is, these were larger, that initially what we had was in the 1900s was we had diseases that were basically related to things like hygiene, viruses that were pathogens that were in our bodies and that we could actually physically observe and see. 2013, what are our diseases? Well, heart disease and cancer are the number one diseases. And what we find is that cancer is actually an environmental disease. Heart disease is related also very often to things like environment, because it has to do with things like smoking, and when that decreases, so does heart disease decrease, but it also has to do with things like stress as well. So these are environmental conditions that we see that are the leading cause of death and associated with death, compared to pathogens that we saw in the 1900s. So big changes in the way then that we should take a look at our disease. And so one of the big changes that we see in looking at disease is changes in what we call psychoneuroimmunology. And so this is an understanding that there is a relationship between things like our nervous system, our hormonal system, and our immune system. And that when we have experienced things like stress, it changes our chemicals in our brain, which then begins to fire in all kinds of ways, which can cause dysfunction in our adrenal glands. It can cause dysfunction in our thyroid, and we're going to be talking about all of that next Sunday. But it also causes things like dysfunction in our inflammation, so that inflammation occurs when we have disease, but it also occurs when we have stress. And inflammation helps us cure pathogens, but inflammation causes things like arthritis and joint pain when we have it unnecessarily. And so these are the things that we're beginning to study when we go outside of pharmaceuticals. We're looking at the relationship that occurs naturally within our bodies so that we can address the environmental concerns that change our hormonal and nervous systems. Here, this slide presents the diseases that are linked to emotion immunity connections, or some dysfunction between, for example, stress and our immune system. So we can see there that we get heart disease. Heart disease is affected by our dysfunction between stress or our emotions and our immune system. We see what we have there, it's affected by both acute and chronic psychological stress. So that could happen something instantly, or it is something that carries over, that is chronic stress that we experience every single day. We can also see that it also creates what we call which is stress cardiomyopathy. So stress cardiomyopathy, and that is experiencing heart pains, right? So that kind of closing of the arteries, which is causing things like angina, and these are precursors to heart attacks. We also see that there is emotional relationships, but the emotional relationship isn't necessarily between the causes of stress and cancer, but there is a relationship in the impact or progression or reoccurrence, but we're not sure because findings can be conflicting. But certainly what we do see is that the attitude in cancer patients that have more positive attitudes means that they are better able to cope, and that's actually what we see. So chronic stress does affect immune response, and therefore it may indirectly affect things like cancer. We also see that we know that emotions and diabetes have been linked since the 17th century. And diabetes can be produced by making a lesion or close to the hypothalamus. And the hypothalamus is related to stress. Why? Because that is the area in our brain that is activated when there is an imbalance in our system. So stress, anxiety, sweating, increased heart rate. So we know that when there is dysfunction in the hypothalamus, that is also related to diabetes as well, or that those kinds of brain dysfunctions or lesions are also related to diabetes. We see also that chronic pain and experiencing things like chronic pain is also associated with stress that we feel in our lives. Okay. Now this next slide that I have here is it's about what's called the Swedish centenarian study, and what this is centenarians are more responsible. So these are individuals who have lived for a century is what they are. So what are we finding out about their emotional states compared to other individuals? Well, we find out that centenarians are more responsible, they were more capable, they were more relaxed, that we see that the Swedish population has a large number that they had studied of these centenarians, that they are also more emotionally stable and they are less prone to anxiety than the general population. What they found was that social characteristics were most important, that they had stable homes, that they had less degrees we can see of loneliness caused by a spouse or by dear friends. We see that marriage also played an important role, where only 2% had been divorced and only 19% had never been married. So most of these individuals were invested in their marital relationships versus individuals who were isolated. Okay, we can also see that only 9% of these centenarians ever felt lonely, and their quality of life had been good or very good. We can also see here, based on this chart that we have, that individuals who were experiencing some of these some of these decreases in health due to isolation, loss of mobility, or physical disability then increases as we get older. And then we can see there breakouts of individuals who are experiencing those poor health conditions at the breakout for males and females and blacks and whites. Okay, so let's just talk just a little bit more then about what are these holistic types of alternatives, and what are they offering for us. So holistic, these are also considered complementary medicines or complementary and alternative medicines. Those are CAMs is what they are. So alternative medicine is any practice. Now this is the way that it's defined in Wikipedia, and so you can begin to see how there is a narrative that is around these holistic or complementary medicines that really are taking a closer look at things like vitamins and minerals and how they can help individuals. But here's how they define it. So holistic or alternative medicines are being defined in Wikipedia as any practice that aims to achieve the healing effects of medicine, but which lacks biological plausibility and is untested, untestable, or proven ineffective. Complementary medicine, complementary and alternative medicine, integrated medicine or integrative medicine, and holistic medicine are among many rebrandings of the same phenomenon. Alternative therapies share in common that they reside outside of medical science and instead rely on pseudoscience. Traditional practices become alternative when used outside their original setting without proper scientific explanation and evidence. Frequently used derogatory terms for the alternative are New Age or pseudo, with little distinction from quackery. Now, this really is just such an unbelievable perspective on, first of all, some medicines that have been around for 4,000 years. And if you take a look at some of the alternative medicines, individuals didn't believe for 4,000 years in just plain quackery. Individuals did have common sense and did rely on observable measures in order to determine things like whether or not you were a good doctor, or whether or not you were a man of your word, right? Or whether or not you were a hard worker or you were diligent. Individuals, just because they were that they looked at different ancient alternatives that are simply absent from science today, does not mean that they were based on quackery. Individuals did know what would make for truth and solid evidence, whether or not they had westernized scientific thought behind it. And often when we are not looking at the mechanics behind our traditional or pharmaceutical or contemporary medicine today, well, that sounds a lot like quackery as well. Okay, so I just wanted to take a look at some of the things that we have been avoiding when we are taking a look at alternative medicines. So what we are talking about is taking a look at, and supplements. So we are talking about vitamins, taking a look at vitamins for supplements. So we're talking about vitamins A, a series of vitamin Bs. We're talking about vitamin C, vitamin D, vitamin E, and I think that's it. We also have other things like minerals that we've talked about, like phosphorus. We have manganese, we have magnesium, we have calcium. So these, we have iron, for example, and these are other things that our body naturally needs. And these things we find in the earth, for example, like minerals, we find those in the earth. And so we can find those in certain plants, have more of those minerals than other plants. We can also get them through, for example, vitamin D through the sunshine. But we will always have in Michigan here, in the Detroit metropolitan area where I'm recording from, we will always have vitamin D3 deficiencies. And therefore, and because we cannot get sufficient vitamin D in our food, we have to take vitamin D supplements. And so this is something that is really not being studied and being avoided. There are mechanics behind vitamin D. We know that all of our resources we get from the sun. So we get those resources from the sun and they fortify our plants. Our animals eat those plants and we eat the plants and animals that are fortified with these nutrients that come from the sun. So there are many places that we can get vitamins and minerals, but we can't produce them in our own bodies by ourselves. And that's why we need to look at outside sources. We need to also study the effects that they have on our bodies. And what we see here is we see the percentage of individuals that are going to the doctors with things like anxiety and feelings of depression, but also have these other symptoms as well. Persistent fatigue in 55 to 58%. Of these individuals who are experiencing anxiety or depression are also having these other symptoms. Persistent fatigue, 87% insomnia, 47% fainting, 45% constipation, 29% diarrhea, 33% shortness of breath, 40% palpitations, 44%, headaches, 28% numbness, 28% chest pain, 48% dizziness, menstrual problems, 56%, and premenstrual syndrome. 62% have multiple allergies, and 91% have irritable bowel syndrome. This is just incredible that we are not taking a look at these relationships between psychological problems like depression and anxiety and looking at physical symptoms that are related to things that will help our sleep, such as ashwagandha helps relieve our stress. So where are those studies? What about studies that are talking about and taking a look at things like essential oils? And are they taking a look at vitamins and minerals in a particular dosage that's recommended from a reputable source? Something that, like, for example, Shaklee, as we know, they go above and beyond when they say organic or non-GMO, for example. Are they studying good quality vitamins and minerals from good quality sources? Okay, so let's take a look at today's question. And today's question that I have for you are, what are the mechanics behind the pharmaceuticals that you're taking? So if you take a look at the pharmaceuticals that you're taking, I can explain the mechanics behind the vitamins and minerals that you need to take. Can you explain the mechanics behind the pharmaceuticals? So that's today's question. Today's question is, can you explain the mechanics behind why your pharmaceuticals are supposed to work? This is Dr. Annette Feravich with Healthy Mind, Body, Spirit. And you can find me on the internet at www.healthymindbodyspirit.net. And remember to join me here on Sundays. Remember that you can find my YouTube channel, Dr. Annette Feravich. Please subscribe, please like, and please share these videos. And we are getting to editing, and stay tuned for when you might be able to see some of these in real series on podcasts. So thanks for joining me, and that's all that I have for you today. Let's just quick take a look at our agenda and what's coming up next week. So next week, we are taking a look at thyroid, adrenal glands, and stress. So we will talk a little bit about ashwagandha. And also on February 20th, we're going to talk about hygiene. That's associated with also a healthy body. And then we're going to start Healthy Mind on February 27th. So once again, thanks for joining me, and have a great week.